As anyone who has been listening to this series knows by now, I'm not a fan of deep water. It's usually in response to the ocean, and thinking of the deep, dark, cold spaces where there are things that we don't know about and that have never known the warmth of Arceus's light. But I'm also not that big a fan of freshwater spaces as well. After all, there can just as easily be dangers in them as there can be in the oceans, as the Lake of Rage in Johto shows. But, to finally get to the point that I've been circling, while I'm not a big fan of the water and the Pokemon found there, a lot of people find aquatic Pokemon to be beautiful and amazing to watch. And one of the ones that's always at the top of that list are these Pokemon. Hello everyone, and welcome to the Pokemon Care Guides, where we go through different Pokemon species and how you can raise them in your own home. Today, we'll be talking about the flowing beauty of the water, Goldeen, and its evolution Seaking. Goldeen is a relatively small aquatic Pokemon, only measuring 2 feet, 0.6 meters, and weighing about 33 pounds, or 15 kilos. Their bodies are predominantly white, with orange markings along the upper side of their body and fins. Their central body is very ovoid in shape, with 2 large eyes and large lips. Their horn is situated in the center of their forehead, and then their fins are what they are known for, looking very much like flowing, dress-like material. These fins are what really draw people to these Pokemon, as many people think that they're beautiful when they swim through the water. Later on, a Goldeen will evolve into a Seaking. Seaking is a much larger fish than its previous evolution, now being over 4 feet long and weighing over 86 pounds usually. That's 1.3 meters and 39 kilos. Seaking keeps the same general body plan that Goldeen does, but its main body is now much rounder and loses a lot of the white coloration, now being a predominantly orange color. The long flowiness of the fins is still present, including the tail fins, which have changed to almost look like butterfree wings colored white with black flecks on them. As well, Seaking keeps the large eyes, lips, and horn of its previous evolution. Overall, I know my descriptions haven't done these Pokemon justice, and there are very large fan bases for both of them that will defend how beautiful these Pokemon are when they swim. If having a Pokemon like that sounds interesting to you, then please listen in and you might find that these Pokemon are the perfect Pokemon partners for you. Enclosure. As I said in the intro, these Pokemon are a freshwater species, so you won't have to deal with the major hassle that saltwater can easily become. Though, as you'll soon see, the best setup for them would be a pond or small lake over an actual aquarium. Of course, there are their horns to think about. These Pokemon are very well known for ramming things with their horns, and they have even had a reputation for shattering glass enclosures that people have put them in. If you try to put them in that kind of enclosure, then you had better make sure that it's rated to handle that kind of impact and force. But the bigger reason that it'd be better for you to have these Pokemon in a pond is the immense size of the enclosure that you need. A Goldeen, a single Goldeen, needs a space that consists of at least 1,000 gallons of water. It's immense, and if you try to get something like that in an aquarium, you're going to be spending quite a bit of money getting it set up. Now, that's not something we've shied away from in this series before. Just last guide, I had you building a tank the size of a Unnovan football field for Kingdra. But thanks to these Pokemon being freshwater Pokemon, you can build them a pond and then not have to deal with the glass. As for the dimensions of the pond, so long as it reaches the 1,000-gallon limit, then you can realistically build whatever you want, whether that be a rectangle, circle, or any other shape that you can think of. The only thing that the majority of the pond has to have is a depth of at least 4 feet. You can go deeper than that, absolutely, and I'm sure that your Pokemon would appreciate that. But the minimum depth for most of the pond needs to be at least 4 feet. This is a precaution for if you live in a place that gets cold during the winter. The top few feet of the water will freeze, and your Pokemon will go to the bottom of the pond and enter a dormant period until the water heats back up. We can get more into that in the care section, but you have to be sure to give them that room, or they'll freeze during the winter, and you'll have to get a new Pokemon. Remember, all of those dimensions that I gave you are just for a Goldeen. Seaking is much bigger than its previous evolution, and therefore needs more space. For them, you'll have to increase the size of the pond to around 1,500 gallons, with the water reaching a depth of at least 6 feet in the majority of the pond. It might not sound like too much of a difference, but thanks to the fact that fish can use the entire space of their enclosure, not just the ground floor, it actually provides a lot more space for your Pokemon. Before we move on to talk about the water itself, which, don't get me wrong, is an important part of the enclosure, there are a few other details about the construction of the pond that I'd like to talk about. First is that you don't want the bottom of the pond to be just dirt. This can lead to things like bad bacteria, bugs, and other pest Pokemon getting into the water. It will also prevent the water from leaching out of the pond and in the surrounding ground. Getting a Pokemon-safe liner for the bottom of the pond will help to prevent that, and then, once the liner is settled and in place, you can add a small layer of substrate onto the bottom of the pond. The best ones to have are a layer of sand or dirt topped with a layer of gravel or smooth pebbles. You'll only need about an inch of it in total. Filtration is also a major thing you'll have to think about, and the cool thing is that you're not going to be using your basic mechanical filter. I mean, yes, that is going to be part of it. You want to make sure that you get a filter that is going to be able to filter at a rate of at least half the volume of the pond per hour. So, if you have a Goldeen pond with the minimum 1,000 gallons, then you need a filter that can filter up to 500 gallons per hour. I'm saying the word filter so much it doesn't sound like a real word to me anymore. Be sure that your filter can handle anything from algae that might be growing in the water to chemicals that can be in the water, such as the high amounts of ammonia that these Pokemon produce in their waste. You can also introduce a small amount of beneficial bacteria to the filter system, which will help to deal with things like the waste and other chemicals from the Pokemon, turning it into a nutritional fertilizer. Which brings me to the other part of the filtration that you can have. Having plants planted along the bottom of the pond can provide not only slight filtration for your water, it can also help to re-oxygenate the water, break down and clean up waste, and provide a multitude of other benefits to your Pokemon. These plants are the reason that I say you want the majority of your pond to be the appropriate depth. For many aquatic plants, they do best when at shallower depths, often between 1 to 2 feet in depth. Having them grow in these shallow areas will allow them to get the best environment while providing all the benefits to the pond overall. You can accomplish this a few different ways, like just planting them on a gentle slope of the bottom pond, putting terraces into the bottom of different heights, and even having pillars throughout the pond that provide the shallower depth for your plants. It's really a matter of how you want to handle it, but having actual living plants in your enclosure is something that I highly recommend. Now, let's talk about the water that you'll need for these Pokemon. There are, just like with any other water enclosure, many factors that you have to keep in mind. Temperature is one of the main things, and thankfully they can tolerate a wide array of temps, as you can tell from the parts about the pond freezing over. They can tolerate between 35 degrees Fahrenheit all the way up to 85 degrees Fahrenheit, so long as the temp swings isn't too sharp of a change in too short of a time. That is 1.7 to 29 degrees Celsius for those of you that use that. However, while they can tolerate those temps, the best and optimal temps for them are between the 65 to 75 degree range, which is 18 to 24 degrees Celsius. Honestly, that's a very reasonable range to have to deal with. A few of the other factors that you should keep your eye on are the pH and the ammonia content of the water. The pH should stay between a level of 7 to 8.6 to keep your Pokemon healthy. As for the ammonia, you want to try and keep that as close to 0 as possible. This can be kind of hard, as the Goldeen line produces a lot of ammonia in their waste, so you have to take measures to prevent this from climbing too high. We'll get more into those in the care section of this guide, but for now, just remember that you're aiming for getting rid of as much of the ammonia in the water as possible. And you can easily keep track of most of the things with tests that you can buy online and the thermostats for the temperature. Lastly is that you may want to add in a few features like waterfalls and streams that feed and help to circulate the water. Not only does this help prevent algae from growing in the water, as moving water makes it much harder for things to grow, it also helps to oxygenate the water as well. I know we often think of water-type Pokemon breathing water through their gills, but what they're really doing is pulling the oxygen content from the water using their gills to breathe. Adding these features to help put oxygen back into the water will obviously help them keep breathing, and we won't have to worry about the water becoming toxic over time. As well, these features are very pleasing to watch and look at, so it'll make coming to the pond an even more enjoyable experience for you than it would be otherwise. The next question is, what Pokemon can be housed with the Goldeen line? The short answer is that you should really avoid any other species in the pond. We'll talk more about this in the care section, once again, but these Pokemon like to ram each other and other creatures with their horns. Having any other Pokemon with them will probably lead to those Pokemon getting hurt. And then, if the Pokemon that they ram into has a temper, then you might have a full-blown fight on your hands. They do well with their own kind, though. It's recommended that you have a school of at least 5, and yes, they will still ram each other with their horns, but it won't be as big of a deal with each other as it would be with other Pokemon. Goldeen and Seaking's biologies are well designed to handle the horn impacts, so you shouldn't have to worry about them too much. One thing you should keep in mind with Seaking is that you have a male and female Pokemon, then they might breed, and if that happens, Seaking burrow holes in the ground where they can lay their eggs, meaning they'll drill right through that liner that you put down. Just something to be aware of when you put these Pokemon together. Availability. Being freshwater Pokemon makes their availability more spotty than things that thrive in the ocean, but as we'll see in the catchability section, that actually makes them easier to catch. That's not to say they aren't common. They can be found in most bodies of fresh water in their homes of Kanto and Johto. Even outside those two regions, there are many places where these Pokemon thrive. There's the southern peninsula of the Unova region, my home turf, if you will, as well as the east and south part of the Sinnoh region, my new home, and they're scattered throughout the Hoenn and Galar regions. I'm not going to list out all the places that can be found in those regions, as I'd just be sitting here listing out route numbers and place names. So if you decide to go looking in these places, then you'll have to do a bit of research on your own. However, I can tell you that in Kalos, you'll be looking on routes 3 and 22. I also have records of there being some in the ponds at Parfum Palace, but considering that's private property and the Pokemon there are probably owned by the estate owner, I would recommend you ask him about that. You might not even be able to catch them, as they might already be tied to a Pokeball. Same with the Alola region, as Goldeen line Pokemon can only be found at Brooklet Hill and Mallet Gardens. Sorry, Alolans, if I butchered that pronunciation. But yeah, if you wanted to go out and get your own Pokemon, then you should have ample opportunity to do so. If, however, you don't feel like going through the effort of catching one of these Pokemon, or you aren't much of a fisherman, then the good news for you is that there are plenty of not only breeders, but full companies that sell these Pokemon. With how popular it is to have these Pokemon in a pond at your home, there are full businesses that breed and raise these Pokemon simply for that reason alone. And there are massive groups of people out there that love to sit and watch these Pokemon swim, meaning that business is a-boomin'. Even if you don't want to go through one of the bigger companies, you can absolutely find a smaller breeder like myself that is more than able to provide for your needs. Getting these Pokemon from the breeder market is going to be as simple as making a few phone calls and setting up a delivery date. Catchability. If you decide you want to catch these Pokemon for yourself, then at least you're going to be dealing with the least dangerous part of fishing. After all, it's not like these Pokemon are deep water Pokemon. They can realistically be caught from the water's edge, so you shouldn't have to deal with the danger of possibly pulling up some super strong horror from the bottom of the ocean. Of course, you should still bring a Pokemon for your protection. After all, Gyarados is nearly an ever-present danger when trying to catch Pokemon no matter where you are, and depending on exactly where you decide to try and catch these Pokemon, there could be other dangers in the area as well. Grass and electric types would be the best to have with you, but realistically the Goldeen line aren't known for their strength, so you won't need something super powerful to deal with them. When you do eventually reel one of these Pokemon in, then a Pokeball should be plenty strong enough for Goldeen and a Great Ball for Seaking. Care. As with any aquatic enclosure that we talk about in this series, the biggest part of how you care for and interact with these Pokemon is going to be cleaning and maintenance of the enclosure. For example, keeping the water clean is going to be a major thing that you do. Cleaning and replacing filtration parts is going to be important, as that's the main way that you're going to be keeping your Pokemon's water looking healthy and clean. Pull out the filter, clean it with a Pokemon safe chemical, and possibly replace it if it needs to be. When you do this, be sure to offset when you clean different parts of the filter system. If you've introduced the beneficial bacteria to the filter system, then cleaning all of it at once will destroy that colony. By only cleaning a part of the filter at a time, you allow that colony to continue living while also keeping them in check. And, as always with any piece of machinery that you have in your enclosure, be sure to regularly check to make sure that it's running properly and there's no issues happening. To that end, you should also be checking and changing the water at least once a week. This will alert you to any dangerous buildup of material in the water, such as nitrates, acidity, and the ammonia we talked about. The testing should be pretty simple. You can get kits for them online fairly easily, but even if your tests come back good, you should still change out some of the water every 2 to 4 weeks so that the water stays fresh and clean. When you do this, don't do more than a quarter of the total water volume at a time. Introducing too much new water to your pond at once could lead to an issue where you cause shock in your Pokemon's system, especially if your pool water quality has dropped noticeably. If you do notice that the water quality has changed in your test, then you should up the water changing routine to every week and a half and continuously do so until your tests come back to normal levels. And lastly, for cleaning, you'll have to remove things from the water's surface. Sunshine is an important part of a healthy Goldeen pond's ecosystem, and as such, things like algae, fallen leaves, and leftover food should be removed from the surface. You can use a simple pool skimmer for this, but it will have to be done at least once a day, so best to get into the habit early. As well, any plants that grow too large and reach the surface should be trimmed back, as to not block the sunlight from the rest of the pond bottom. Moving on to food, the majority of the food that you're going to find for these Pokemon is going to be store-bought, man-made flake foods, and generally things that are optimized for your Pokemon's health. And in reality, those are absolutely fine to feed your Pokemon in this case. Of course, do your research on the brand and how good their food is, but overall, they'll be fine, and a flake food will probably end up being cheaper and more accessible than a natural diet. As well, each type and brand of food has their own serving size and recommended feeding schedule, so be sure to look that up as well when you finally decide on a brand. However, for those of you that want to avoid processed food for these Pokemon, you do have a few options. In the wild, Goldeen and Sea King are both omnivores. They use their horns to dig through the mud on the bottom of their pond, pulling up plants, roots, and seeds, but also eating any insect Pokemon that they find there. And so, you can feed them a mixture of seeds and meat. As for the amounts, I don't really know what to tell you. Because every diet I found online talks about using the flake food, there really isn't any research on how much and when to feed them a more natural diet. I'm assuming that they would be able to somewhat feed off the natural environment thanks to the plants that you've planted on the bottom of the lake and the natural prey they get from bugs that fly down and land on the surface of their pond. So the best I can offer for those of you that want to give a natural diet is to record how much your Pokemon eats with each meal. This may lead to wastage as you throw food into the pond they don't eat, but it really is the best way to zero in on how much you're going to need to feed for each feeding. And then, no matter what kind of feeding you decide to do, you'll have to skim and clean the top of the water to get any food that your Pokemon doesn't eat. If it's left there, it'll eventually become sources of bacteria growth that can impact the health of your Pokemon and the pond's ecosystem in general. As for how you're going to interact with the Pokemon, they're actually very intelligent Pokemon. For fish, anyway. Same for any Pokemon, the key to forming a good bond with them is through patience, consistency, and gentleness. By constantly approaching the edge of the pond and just hanging out, spending time near your Pokemon, they'll eventually begin to see you as less of a potential predator and more as a welcome caretaker. Food will, of course, help this along. The more you feed your Pokemon without having a negative experience, such as startling them, the more they will associate you with that positive stimuli. And as the bond begins to get stronger and solidify, you'll even be able to do things such as sit down by the water and place your hands in the water without startling the Pokemon away from you. It will just take time to get to that point, and they will flee from you if you try to do it too early, which can be harmful to the formation of the bond. Wait until the Pokemon begin to approach you when you get to the pond's edge, and go slow when you put your hands into the water. Patience is the key with this. Which does bring me to 2 points. One is that hand feeding these Pokemon is a very common thing for owners to do. Once you have the bond with the Pokemon to the point where they don't scatter when your hand enters the water, you can actually place the food in your palm and have the Pokemon come up and eat it out of your hand. They don't have any teeth, so there isn't any risk of you losing a finger that way, and this practice will also help the bond between the two of you get stronger as they recognize you won't grab at them or hurt them. Eventually, they may even let you pet them as they swim by. However, I should mention that there is still some slight danger with this practice. Goldeen and Sea King horns are very sharp, and they have no issues ramming into things that they feel shouldn't be in their space. If you place your hand in the water before the Pokemon are comfortable with you being there, there's a decent chance that one of them might feel threatened enough to ram you with their horn. Depending on how hard the Pokemon hits you and where they get you, then this may require a trip to the hospital and possibly even something like stitches. Even when the Pokemon is comfortable with you being around them and placing your hands in the water, they may make a sudden movement and catch you with that horn. So if you decide to interact with your Pokemon in this way, then I feel I should make you aware that doing so does present a risk to your safety, marginal as it might be. Also, if you do get cut in the pond, then you'll have to start changing the water out to try and get the blood out of the water as fast as possible. Which, I'm going to tell you this right now, that is going to suck having to do with an injured hand. And I feel like this should go without saying, but I'm going to say it anyway, don't swim in the pond. I don't care how comfortable you and the Pokemon are with each other, that's just a step too far. Not only could you be introducing bacteria and chemicals into the water that could be on your body and clothing, but now it's not just your hand that's at risk of getting pierced by a horn. And nobody wants to be known as the guy that had to go to the doctor because a Goldeen stabbed him in the chest. Let's be smart about this, people, please. Cost. Thankfully, the Pokemon isn't going to be too much money. Like I said, because of their popularity, there are plenty of companies and breeders out there that produce and sell these Pokemon. Of course, they are considered a luxury or vanity Pokemon, thanks to their popularity and beauty, so the price isn't too low. Realistically, you're probably looking at about the moderate category to stock your pond, maybe a bit more depending on how many you decide to get. The food won't be that bad, even if you decide to go with the natural diet. The flakes you can buy in bulk quantities, meaning that you can save quite a bit of money by doing so. As for the more natural side, you're obviously going to have to spend more just because you're actually buying things like meat, seeds, and plants. Really, what's going to cost you a bunch with these guys is the fact that you should have a couple of them per enclosure. Between the two ways you can feed them and having to feed multiple Pokemon, I don't see you spending more than the moderate category to the high category for a Goldeen, and definitely into the high category for a Sea King. Lastly, the enclosure is gonna cost you a pretty penny. Building these kinds of enclosures isn't an easy thing. You can't just dig a hole and put the Pokemon in that. With all the things that you need to make the pond viable, with the plants and the filtration and the liner, you're certainly looking at the very high category no matter which evolution you decide to have. Conclusion. In reality, Goldeen and Sea King are decent Pokemon to have, but don't have too many things that stand out about them aside from their physical beauty. They don't take too much effort to care for, and they don't have incredible or outstanding needs in their care or food or enclosure. I really think that these Pokemon make a wonderful decoration piece to any home, and if you can get to the point where you bond with them and are able to actually interact with them without needing to have stitches afterward, they can even become wonderful and highly loved parts of the home. But if you never get to that point, then they might end up being delegated to just a decoration with extra steps. I would really consider how much you're going to invest into these creatures before you go ahead and get them purely because you think they look amazing. Now, I will say that, in my opinion, I very much prefer Pokemon that I can directly interact with on a more personal level, but that's just me. You might have listened to this and come to realize that these easygoing and beautiful Pokemon could quite easily end up becoming the perfect Pokemon partners for you. Thank you all for listening, and please join us again next time when we go over the star-shaped Pokemon Staryu and its evolution Starmie. Have a wonderful night, everyone.